Great, so welcome everyone. I'm super excited to do this class on the wise reflection on compassion and equanimity today. For me, it's the last of the kind of big five of the wise reflections, which at least I got this list from Mark and Steve and Rosemary. So when they speak about the wise reflections, they somehow seem to mention those. Although, for example, in the book by Steve Wiseman, he mentions many more wise reflections which exist and which are also beneficial. And as you know, some time ago, Mark started a series on those five, and somehow we stopped after three. And since then, I felt like learning them. Actually, I felt like learning them. And when I asked Mark about continuing to teach them to the group, he was like, "I teach it to you, and then you teach it to everyone else." And so that's what I'm doing now. And now finally, I'm able to teach the last one. Thanks, Sophia, to the question in the Slack channel. Let me also enumerate those five first. So these five reflections, which are, they're great and I can really recommend them to you. And if you're interested, maybe we can do more sessions on the other ones as a refresher if you want. Are first, how fortunate we are. That would be the first reflection. Then the reflection on suffering. There Mark recommended to reflect on he again called it the five big ones, but in terms of suffering, which would be illness, injury, aging, grief, and death. So that's the five of the sufferings. As you know, Buddhists like numberings. Then there's death, again as a separate reflection, where we typically reflect on... there's many ways of reflecting on death. But one way I like to reflect on it is to reflect, will I die, as a first question? And then the second question would be, when will I die? And the third question will be, the moment I die, or imagining the moment I'm dying, what will really matter what will really have mattered in my life when I imagine this moment to be there? And then to send a little note to your current self. That's also a really beautiful practice. Then we have karma, the law of cause and effect, which I introduced a few months ago. And then finally, the reflection on compassion and equanimity, which is what we will talk about today. So these are the five big ones in terms of wise reflections. I would like to first start saying some things about equanimity and then why we will balance it with compassion or why it is helpful to balance compassion with equanimity rather. Then we will do a guided practice, and afterwards we'll have time for some Q&A session. I have no idea how long it will take, but it will be maximum 90 minutes and I guess minimum 60 minutes. Let's see. Okay, everything good so far? Any questions or logistics that need to be clarified right now? Okay, great. So equanimity. Equanimity is upekkha in Pali, and it's often translated as balance or even-mindedness. And many of us will have heard about equanimity already in the context of the 4 Brahma Viharas. So those are loving kindness, metta, which is the wish for others to be happy. Then we have compassion, karuna, which is the wish for others to be free of suffering. And importantly, it's also important to clarify what compassion is not. Compassion is not pity, because pity, like the English word pity, not the Pali word pity, which is translated to joy. So English pity is like more distant, and it has a sense of separation and superiority in it. So compassion is rather near and warm, and the wish for others to be free of suffering, but in a love-filled way, not in a way that is filled with separateness. And also compassion is not despair or overwhelm. And for that, it's also important to balance it with equanimity, to which I will get in a moment. So then we have loving kindness, we have compassion, then we have sympathetic joy, which is simply to take delight in other people's happiness. That's also a very powerful practice if one is dealing with envy. I've done, or comparing. So I've really successfully applied that for myself, and I really like this practice of joy, of empathetic joy or sympathetic joy. And then we have equanimity. And again, from equanimity, I would like to start saying what it is not as a first thing, because it can easy. So as you know, for the Brahma Viharas, we always have the near enemy and the far enemy. And the near enemy of equanimity is indifference. So that would be not caring or shutting down emotionally. That's not what equanimity is. And it's not passive and it's not apathic. So to compare them, it's like indifference would be shutting down emotional engagement, but equanimity, on the other hand, really fully engaged with the present moment. Passivity would accept everything without discernment, but equanimity responds wisely and skillfully. And finally, apathy arises from disconnection, while equanimity arises from a profound connection and understanding of life and with life. So in some way, equanimity is a middle way to be fully engaged and fully aware, but at the same time not clinging or pushing away. So in equanimity, there is neither attachment nor aversion. And it allows to fully embrace the fullness of life. And so, like, the state of the equanimity or the practice of equanimity allows us to be open and present with whatever arises out of a trust in the unfolding of life. So, it's also not about suppressing emotions or bypassing difficulties, but instead it's more about cultivating a spacious awareness that embraces all experience, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, and not clinging to what we want or rejecting what we don't want. And this perspective allows us to meet the 8 worldly dharmas, which will always be there. It's also called 8 worldly winds because they just blow through our lives from different directions, without clinging or having aversion to them. These 8 worldly dharmas are praise and blame, gain, loss, joy, sorrow, and pleasure and pain. So they will always be there, and equanimity allows us to embrace them all and not to cling to them or to reject them. So, what else do I want to say about that? Yeah, so in summary, equanimity doesn't mean we stop caring. It's rather care infused with wisdom and understanding. And with the wisdom that we can't control the outcomes of our actions, but we can engage with life skillfully and wholeheartedly. And so rather than withdrawal, it's a profound engagement, and it's warm, care-filled and compassionate and wise. So that's how I would describe equanimity. And equanimity has a function to anchor and stabilize the other 3 Brahma Viharas. So now we're getting to why do we practice compassion and equanimity together. And a few examples would be that without equanimity, loving kindness could, for example, slip into attachment, which is, again, the near enemy. Or sympathetic joy, or the practice of joy, could somehow lead to overexcitement, over-enthusiasm, or just kind of, not handling those emotions in a very skillful way or not in a very mindful way. And for compassion, there is the near enemies of overwhelm, burnout, etc. And so equanimity can help us to not feel paralyzed or emotionally flooded, but compassion that includes equanimity allows us to provide a balance and more skillfully interact with life and difficult situations. And the idea behind that is that it's good to be very compassionate and to act as compassionate as possible, but at the same time, we can't perfect not creating harm. We cannot control the world, and negative outcomes are also not always our responsibility. And so equanimity for me also means I can only do the best I can. And so it's very important to balance them in order to not fall into despair. So this balance of compassion and equanimity, like I liked what Mark said, that as contemplatives we have to learn to hold paradoxes. And somehow this is also a paradox. So on the one hand, hold compassion, and at the same time also stay equanimous. And this wise reflection can really help us to hold them both. By practicing one after the other, we can then learn to, in the moment, when we're in a situation in life which requires this, be able to hold compassion and equanimity at the same time. I would like to give a few examples of where we could see this balance of holding these two things at the same time. So one would be a nurse. So a nurse who takes care of people who are sick or ill. Of course, we want, like as a nurse, there should be a lot of compassion. So we want to alleviate the suffering. The nurse wants the other people to be well. But eventually, sometimes they just can't do anything. And so a nurse also has to have the skill to let the patient go. Eventually life ends. And so if the nurse would fall into despair every time somebody dies or passes or does not get well, which they took care of, then of course that would also not make the nurse's life and the life of the people around the nurse better. That would be the first one. Then we have the picture of the parent. Also as parents, I can say now we know that that children or all beings, in order to grow, they need to make their experience and sometimes also fall down. And so there is this picture of the parent who, with a lot of love and care, watches the child, but still lets it do their own experience and their life, because they know that by trying to hold them or overprotect them, the child or the young being or any being will just not be able to grow up, and ultimately it will not be able to learn to deal with life and to grow up. The last picture is that of the garden. So that obviously also comes from Mark, which often speaks about people being responsible for tilling or taking care of their own garden. And I like this picture of everyone having their garden. And of course, if I have a problem with my garden, it's perfectly fine to ask the fellow gardener of the garden next door to maybe help me to pull out the heavy stone or tree or something like this from the garden. But at the same time, it's still my garden. And so as somebody who supports, I come and I help you to do something in your garden and to support you there. But at the same time, it's important to know that everyone has their garden. And so I'm not becoming responsible for completely taking care of the garden of the other person. So the other person is still responsible for their garden, but I'm willing to help. And at the same time, I know that it's not my role to completely fix their garden or take care of their garden all the time. So these are 3 pictures, and we will also revisit them during the meditation afterwards. During the meditation, we will practice in the following way. we will pick some people and first extend compassion towards them. And we evoke this feeling of compassion, of wanting them, or this intention of compassion rather, and of wanting them to be well and to alleviate their suffering. And then we circle through those people again, and we take a voice of equanimity. So we experience looking at their suffering again, but at the same time holding this equanimity and trying to explore this attitude of equanimity towards the same suffering. And that's the practice. And that's in terms of theory, or that's everything I wanted to share. So if you would like to find a comfortable seated position, we could start the practice. Comfortable and upright, ideally. Camera can be on or off. Eyes can be open or closed. So, to start, if you want, take a few deep breaths first. Settling into your position. Feeling where you are right now, your body. Checking in if there are any tense areas and allowing them to gently relax. Checking in with the breath. Noting how it is right now, shallow or deep. And in this practice, we first bring to mind somebody we love, somebody that is close to you, and where it's easy to feel some compassion. And now I would like you to reflect on their measure of sorrow, taking stock of their life and seeing what challenges there are in their life. And for this first part, I would like you to soften your heart. There's somebody you love with a complex body and mind and their measure of sorrow. And allow your heart to soften, and as you see where they suffer, allow the wish of them to be free of suffering to arise. Think of the sufferings and the struggles in their life and allow the wish for them to be free of suffering to arise naturally. the feelings are not so important actually, it's more about the intention. So allow this intention for their well-being, their freedom of suffering to arise. And it might also help to reflect on how you have suffered in similar ways, to feel more connected to that suffering. Now start reflecting on the roots of this suffering. What lays at the root of their suffering? And with the roots of suffering, you can always go deeper. What lays at the root? Maybe lack of practice, maybe habits that are not sustainable, maybe a view of themselves and life which is not helpful. And as you reflect on the roots of their suffering, allow the generation of this wish that your loved one might be maybe free of suffering. And now we use this compassion energy we have built by reflecting on their suffering and turn it into love, into the loving and kind wish for them to be free of suffering. May the causes and conditions within you and around you change so that it allows you to meet and digest this pain. May you become wise, and through becoming wise, may you become well. May you become wise and filled with love. Wise and super well. May you encounter those skills and tools and people that help you support this transition to becoming wise and full of love. May you be well. May you be completely, unbelievably well. And feel free to extend more wishes to your loved one. And if it sounds right, or if it feels right, you can also make it into a prayer. Pray that reality moves so that this person becomes well, this being becomes well. Okay, now we're gonna leave our loved ones aside and reflect on ourselves, but not ourselves right now, but on a past self. One time of our lives when we were struggling, when we had suffering. And again, we reflect on the suffering and the causes of that suffering. What was that suffering? And what was at the root of the suffering? Letting it soften our hearts, thinking about the suffering of this sentient being born in this world with complex conditions and not yet fully understanding the nature of this life, filled with sorrow and struggle and resistance. This suffering is real. You're an insider to this, so let it soften your heart. And now again, convert this compassion into fuel. Use it to fuel your loving kind wish. May the conditions within you and around you change. Allow you to meet and digest all the problems of this life. May you be free of suffering. May you become wise and well. Wise and full of love and deeply well. May you come in contact with those teaching and skills and people that allow you to become well, to transform you. May this happen for you. And you can also imagine this intention flowing towards them as a light, as change. And as it flows to you, to your past self, watch it making an impact. Watch it change the conditions and having mind, body and life coming into harmony. The pain doesn't go away, but they become wise to meet and understand everything that happens. Hold this loving kind wish for a little bit longer. May you be well. May you be well. Okay, allowing this image of you to pass, take a few breaths Soften your face, your belly, your hands, your heart space. And take another few big breaths if you want. Deep inhales and deep, long, cleansing exhales. Okay. Now round 2. Bring again, once more, to mind the loved one that you started with today. And start in the same way, making a laundry list of all the sorrows in their life. Except this time, instead of letting it soften your heart, take an equanimous position. The position of a loving friend that deeply knows that this sorrow is theirs. It's their garden to till, their garden to take care of. And if you were to take care of it for themselves, they would miss a precious opportunity to grow up and wake up. Continuing to reflect on their suffering. And being aware how suffering is necessary for their growth. It's perfectly fine. They need the material to grow up and clean up. And we are not wishing the anxiety away from them, because it would prevent their growth. Now reflect on the same sufferings as before from this perspective. And notice what the difference in feeling tone is. And notice what happens inside you. If there's any urgency or upset, that's yours too. No need to change it. You can take an equanimous position towards your own reaction to this practice as well. And if it's available to you, notice the clean and cool energy. Nothing to do. Everything is being taken care of. Their pain and suffering and loneliness will brew them like a fine tea. You just have to allow them to grow. If it's uncomfortable and new, that's okay. If it's juicy and supportive, that's also okay. allowing the image of our loved one to pass away now too, I would like you to bring your past self to mind. The same as before, making a laundry list of the sorrows in their life. And again, start by taking an equanimous position towards this being that, because of their ignorance, struggles so much. Reflecting on their suffering and seeing how it's growing pains. Suffering is the pain of growing. This is your measure of sorrow. Elegant, intelligent, and well designed. Nothing for you to do. This isn't with a lot of distance. It's warm and close and equal. I love you, so this is yours. Completely yours, perfect as it is. If this feels awkward and weird, it's okay. If it feels cool and liberative, it's also okay. Take an equanimous position to these feelings as well. Continuing to make a laundry list of the suffering of your past self and watching it from this position. Can you see how life is well constructed? Can you feel it? Many of us are like behind a slow-moving train trying to make it move faster. The train is already moving. Just jump on the train. Don't tire yourself pushing it. Allow the pain and suffering to brew your past self, yourself, your loved one. Can you see it? Can you feel it? This process is human. We don't want to remove it. Can you see your suffering now a little bit more lightly and fluid, not so intense? Okay, now gently let the past image of yourself fall away as well. And take a couple of big breaths. Let the energy evaporate from you. If you want, you can also shake a little bit. And I suggest you give yourself today a little bit of time later on to reflect on this. This equanimous position sometimes is the underdeveloped part. We already have a lot of empathy. So it's good to balance the two. Now, gently with your own time, you can come back to the room.